Shooting it raw?
Yes. Shooting it raw. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Shooting It Raw. Welcome to the podcast. I'm Ranal Fassi, and this is the show where we say, if life really is a gift, how do we make every second count? At the moment, I'm actually in Savannah, Georgia, and I've been trying to find somebody to talk to. It's so sad. I can't find anyone. Nah, it's okay. I'm just having fun. Yes, but this week I'm going to reissue the episode I had with David Stuss. The title was On the Extraordinary That We Want to Share. So how do you see the world? How do you interact with what's around you? That was the basis, in a way, of our conversation. And it's a good one. It's a really good one. David is a smart cookie for sure. And I hope you enjoy it. Yeah, here he is, David Stuss.
There's, photography as I appreciate it done by others, and then there's photography as I practice it. And in my case, I'm not a professional. I do it with my smartphone, and it's just a way of capturing these unique moments where something suddenly jumps out at you. You see something beautiful or extraordinary and singular, and finding a way to frame and compose that. So, and sometimes a story will come out of it. Mm-hmm. I often find that for some of the photographs that I do, I'll just be suddenly hit with a feeling. It's like I need to take a picture of that, and then only afterwards, upon looking at it, it's like it unspools itself into an interesting story, mm-hmm. which I might have felt in some inchoate kind of way, but it certainly wasn't there when I took the photo.
Okay, so David Stuss, am I saying your last name correctly? Stuss or Stuss?
You are indeed.
Okay.
Yeah, well, depends on whether you're back in the old country, but yes.
David Stuss!
Stuss is what we say here in North America.
Okay. So the first photo, first of all, welcome to Shooting It Raw. I appreciate you joining me on this hour-long conversation. We'll see where we end up, but here's the one thing that I think is really funny, or quite telling. We live in a world where we can make photos with our phones very easily. So the mechanics of making great photographs is kind of taken out. So my approach has been, okay, well, what are you doing? What are you doing with your pictures then? And what inspires you to make a photo? So you preface, you sort of say, oh, look, I'm not really a photographer. I'm not really a professional photographer and blah, blah, blah. But then you send me these images and they're stunning. They're really great, right? And so and that's kind of, it proves the point. It's just, in this case, okay, so you sent me 3 photos, and we'll talk about the first one, which is Hatfell.
Hatfell, yeah, I guess you would call it an extinct volcano, or it's not, it's not going to come to life again in Iceland.
Oh wow!
In the southern highlands of Iceland.
So the photograph, just so I can describe it, the horizon, which is, you can't clearly see the horizon, but the line is essentially cutting through half of the image. The top half is the sky. So what I love about photographs where there aren't a lot of mountains nearby is that you can see the cloud cover kind of low, and yes. Above that you see the sky with high clouds. So it's like different shades of blue, and then you've got the low clouds, which is gray and white.
Yeah.
The bottom half is this dark soil. There's it's very, very dark. It's almost, in some areas it's black, gray, very arid, so there's not much vegetation on it. And yet right in the middle, cutting the middle of the image, is this beautiful rising, it looks like it's probably about 300 meters or 600 feet tall, and it's got it's very volcanic, and it's got this very subtle new green on it. Yeah, so it's a stunning image. It's stunning. So what does this communicate, and what's the story behind this image? clearly you're in Iceland.
Yes, yeah. So probably about a decade ago, I had a friend and his partner, a friend from graduate school, and as I had wrapped that up, we just decided to go on a hiking trip in Iceland. I think I can't recall. I think they might have been doing something for either getting married, and it was their month-long honeymoon, and I got to sort of tag along for as the third wheel for the first.
Okay, so describe this friend. Good friend, clearly.
Yeah, really good friend. Yeah, yeah, not that good, but yeah. No, they were lovely people. Good enough to have me tag me along. Yeah, exactly.
I love it.
Yeah. So we flew into Reykjavik, and of course Iceland is really small. And they've got these amazing tours you can take. But there's this trail in the Southern Highlands. They have this amazing kind of very well regulated hike system and cabin system where you have to book months in advance. They only let so many people on, and it's only open for I think a few months of the year, maybe half a year at best. And so anyway, we bust in, and I think it was a 6-day hike. And
oh wow!
It was honestly one of the most extraordinary experiences of my life doing this trail. So you're in the Highlands. It's a lot of it is sort of the nature of Iceland. It's sort of this upwelling of where these two continental plates are interacting. So it's it's very active, kind of an elemental landscape. And on this particular hike, I think probably within about an hour of getting off the tour bus, having the backpack, and wandering in, I honestly felt like I had entered into some sort of Tolkien-esque landscape. It just felt it's like this. You pass through this veil, and then you were just in this magical other world. Mm-hmm. Where I've told many friends this, but I'm sure you probably have heard that Icelanders, for example, believe in elves, which just sounds like this sort of preposterous thing in a modern age. But honestly, after an hour into that trail, I was like, oh, okay, I get it.
Yeah,
I get it. I get it. Why this makes sense to you. Uh-huh. And so, I think almost every hour you would sort of cross some sort of hilltop and come across this, just jaw-dropping vista. Mm-hmm. And I think this one, Hatfell, was on the third day. And so my experience with this was, it almost felt like encountering like an old god or something like this. I had sort of wandered off on my own. As you can see, there's nobody else, nearby on the trail. Other hikers would, often be separated by kilometers. You have no real sense of scale in this landscape. So, maybe your height estimate is correct, but it's very difficult mm-hmm. because there's nothing near or far. You've got all this volcanic rock. So it's completely barren. And really you get this feeling almost like being on Mars or something like that. Mm-hmm. Right. So, and then suddenly there's just this solitary, majestic entity, just sort of taking up the horizon with this mm-hmm. little trail leading up to it. Yeah, it was truly awe-inspiring.
Did you end up climbing it?
No. I'm not sure if they encourage that or not. Mm-hmm. But the weather's not always that sympathetic up there. So usually you want to try to make sure you get from cabin to cabin while you've got enough light. And yeah.
Okay, so let's just rewind a little bit. So your friend and you were in graduate school.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he was a postdoc. He was a postdoc at the time.
Okay, but in what field? Geology or?
No, in neuroscience, actually.
Oh, okay. And what about you?
Yeah, same. That's what my grad work was in.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
I didn't know.
Yeah.
I didn't know. Well, wait a second. Do you know that Mike? You know the name Michael Sapolsky? He's pretty well regarded.
Down at Stanford. Is it Michael?
Yeah.
Yeah, the fellow who does the work with primates.
Yes, exactly. And who looks like?
Is it Mike?
I think it's Michael Sapolsky.
Okay.
But Jennifer Sapolsky? No, it's Michael. But anyway, so I love the fact that we have this intersection. I didn't know that. And whose impulse was it to go to Iceland if I was imagining you guys were in geology or something. So that was
Right. No, they're from the UK.
Okay.
The couple, and they had returned back there.
Okay.
And so by that time, I was finishing up. His postdoc had finished. They had gone back to the UK, and then we're planning this trip. So
Okay.
yeah, it's just something that we were just discussing. They said they were doing it. Would I like to come along? And I just jumped at the chance.
Oh, amazing. So were there places where you hit snow, or it's not quite that time of the year?
Right at the very beginning, you can, like the elevation increases. If you're going from north to south, you can access this sort of 6-day hike from either end. Mm-hmm. And at the very beginning, there's this really rapid sort of climb to a higher elevation. Mm-hmm. And there's definitely you're stepping over snow at some parts of it.
Right. Wow.
Yeah.
I really like the light and the image, and it's very stark. And so, in a sense, like, okay, so have you had any training at all in visual media or photography?
None whatsoever. This is all entirely. I wouldn't even say self-taught. I just do what I like.
You just go
and sometimes they turn out. Yeah.
Oh well, yeah. Shit. The photos you sent were all great. Okay.
Yeah.
Let's go to the next one.
Sure.
Okay. This one, okay, so okay, you say, oh well, self-taught, and they'll turn out. And this one, okay, it's selfie in glass, mirrors within mirrors. Okay.
Yeah.
It looks okay. So I'll let me describe it. So when you look at it, it's a confusing image because it's almost monochromatic. So it's mostly whites and blacks and grays, but there's also some green in there because you're photographing through a window or a porch. Mm-hmm. Behind the glass are some what looks like BC, British Columbia, I don't know, trees and shrubs. Could be a raspberry bush, maybe not.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Yeah, it's a planter.
Yeah, and you can see part of the reflection of inside of the house, and then you see through, and you see the trees, and you see the water, and the deck with a chair. And it's chaotic. It's chaotic, and the fact that you called it a selfie in glass immediately causes me to look for your face, and I can't really see it. And in a way, I'm not saying that this is a very artistic, in quotes, image because it's abstract or anything, but it is. Yeah, it's great. Like it's so. What does this evoke? I mean, when I look at this, it reminds me of Savory, the island Savory in British Columbia. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. It kind of a view like that. So where is it? Why? Who? What? When?
Yeah. So honestly, this is one of my favorite photographs that I've ever taken because there's so much depth to it, and there's so much kind of interesting interpretations you can pull out of it. Mm-hmm. So first off, it was taken just kind of at a weekend trip to Point No Point, which is, if you've been in British Columbia, kind of past Souk, mm-hmm. having up the southwest side of the island.
Nice.
And of course, I think kind of a wintertime scene. So you get that feeling of the BC coast. People might think of it as Seattle. It's the Pacific Northwest, right? That kind of like gray overcast.
British Columbia.
Yeah, exactly. So, I was just out standing in front of the cabin where I was staying with my family, and kind of just wandering around. And as you correctly surmised, I'm standing and facing the deck, and there's some glass panels, right, mm-hmm. sort of along the railing. And of course, you can see the sliding glass doors and the windows behind that on the other side of the deck. Mm-hmm. And the selfie part, just maybe to pull it out of the image, you can actually make out my ear. I've got this kind of right in the center of the image. I'm wearing actually a kind of a peaked cap. You see, there's that kind of like sort of semi-ovoid structure. Mm-hmm. It looks a little. So that's my hat, and you can see my right ear.
Right.
Or I guess, sorry, it would be my left ear reflected in.
Yeah.
It. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, but you know what? Even though you say that, for the listeners, I have to say, it's one of those things that, yeah, you could see it, but it's kind of you would never be able to pick it out.
No, not unless you were told.
Yeah. And it's I like this kind of visual confusion.
Yeah, but the center of the image, that where really you can sort of see everything most clearly, is where my face is, where the chair and the plants inside the
Right.
planter.
Right.
Yeah.
Just some of the things that I end up thinking about is that it looks like monochromatic. Like there is some color, but and yet it's all mostly black and white. So has this been kind of filtered? And I'm sorry if I'm getting a little nerdy about it, but like, has this?
That's okay. Yeah, I think almost all of the images. So I post these things on Instagram, and I almost always do a little bit of sort of filter tweaking just to just sort of enhance. Nothing too dramatic, but to pull out some of the things that I think make the image more visually appealing or interesting.
When you grew up, did you grow up? I think you had mentioned earlier, like you mentioned in Ontario, right? Near Orleans?
Yeah, just outside of Ottawa. That's right. So actually, in a little bit in Orleans, but even further out than Orleans, in a village called Cumberland, was just a couple of thousand people who lived there.
Oh wow! So what does your dad? What's your dad like? That you ended up going to neuroscience in Ottawa, outside of Ottawa, and then right now you end up in BC.
Yeah, he was. Well, we have this very kind of peculiar relationship and peculiar pattern. A lot of my life path kind of recapitulates his. So was very, very like him in a lot of ways, which, sometimes made our relationship difficult and sometimes enhanced it. But, he also, so he had a difficult relationship with his dad. He went out west after he graduated and became a monk for just about half a decade. And then he went back and he became a neuropsychologist, and actually went on to have quite, late in life, to have really quite an extraordinary career in that. Yeah, and it just turned out, the apple didn't fall far from the tree as far as, my interests. I had a lot of similar interests in the brain and consciousness and,
wow,
and how they work.
So I know many people in BC. Okay, so you and I met while I was there for, 4 or 5 months. And I was really taken by the quality of your expression and thinking. And you're still skateboarding?
Oh, good. Well, if I had the opportunity to, I think I'm at an age where there's a certain, like, very visceral trepidation that that I feel.
Ignore that trepidation. Just go for it.
Some of my ankles are held together with bits of shoelace now, and so yeah. But I think if I had one and there was a skate park nearby, I would probably be out there fairly often, just early in the morning,
right.
Before the grommets took over.
So okay, right now you're teaching.
Yes.
Okay. Is what you're teaching nonfiction factual information, or is it?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm in the chemistry department actually at a college. So I came through there on my extremely meandering academic journey, and where I started out in philosophy and the humanities, and decided I wanted to do the sciences, which I had never really done in high school. So as I was approaching my 30s, just sort of hit the reset button and started from the bottom and right at the very beginning. And I ended up returning to the place where I actually had done the first bit of my undergraduate in the sciences, and I had made a very good connection with some of the instructors there, and I think I had spent enough time tutoring my peers when I was in the program that they thought I would be a good fit as a teacher. They invited me back later. Yeah.
Oh wow! From reading Sapolsky, from reading
Robert,
you're right. It is Robert, not Michael.
Yes.
I'm gonna call him Jennifer. Whatever.
Okay.
Maybe one reason he didn't want to join me on the podcast was I was calling him Michael. He's like, yeah, thanks, but no thanks. Get my name straight. Okay, so let's say there's a thread, and it's a leap. It's a leap, but let's go down that thread or whatever. Right now you're teaching chemistry, right? Which for me is like one of the. I mean, biology is a fascinating science, but chemistry to me is a really hard science. Okay, so that thread going down into, say, neuroscience and then going back down to philosophy, how would you connect it? Right? Because just on my side, I have this very broad range of experience, but the thread is always communication, right? Be it scientific communication or whatever, right? So is there a thread that you can draw?
I very, very much so. I think, well, temperamentally, in terms of my my public self-expression, although inwardly I'm highly inclined to I don't know, exploring topics which are out on the fringes, if you like.
Okay.
As you know, I really enjoy thinking about and exploring what some people would think are very peculiar ideas.
Okay.
Sort of, heading into the science fiction or more speculative kinds of thinking. But publicly speaking, I tend to be much more conservative. And if I'm going to, although I'm not formally titled a professor, if I'm going to profess something, it's going to be something which I consider highly reliable.
Okay.
Highly reliable information, and
Right.
Chemistry is certainly that. So there's that aspect to it, as a matter of personal psychological temperament. But I think in the background, I have a certain affinity for the idea that lifting all boats by arriving at a kind of consensus understanding of the nature of reality.
Mm-hmm.
That's just something which I put a tremendous amount of value on.
Oh, wow.
And I like sharing information. So I think, like you, I like communicating. I really like sharing information with people. And I find that personally tremendously rewarding. And so, teaching is a really natural avenue for me.
Well, one of the things that I do in my day job is, I write books and stuff. And so one of the books that I'm writing with my client is on human advancement, right? So this idea that, there are certain people out there who, for whatever reason, push the envelope or push a knowledge or understanding just a little bit, and then raise, all boats sort of style. And so, so in a way, like the guests that I have on the podcast, it'd be great if they were like all notables, right? Like famous people and all that stuff. But
Sure.
But I think it's just as interesting and just as revealing to have people in their own little corners. Like you're in Victoria, BC, and yet everybody's kind of lifting their little network upwards and outwards, and for the rest of the world, for all we know, you're coming out with certain ideas and sharing certain ideas that raise people around you to think new ideas, and it's just constantly elevating your network of what people are thinking. I know I'm not making sense at all.
No, I think I follow you exactly. I think I follow you exactly. Well, in fact, I think you're articulating what I would say would be, if I had to choose how my life would go, it would be to do exactly that invisibly. So if I could just, I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Wings of Desire by Wim Wenders, right? And of course, what the angel does, he just floats into these individuals, because he can sort of telepathically connect with what anybody is thinking around him. And he'll just, if somebody's in a state of distress, will stand by them and put his hand on their shoulder, and their consciousness changes. And sometimes they kind of sense that there's a presence there, but sometimes it's just that their thought process changes.
Right.
And then, they take a different direction. There's something that I find so exquisitely beautiful about that idea. And to effectively sort of heal or transform what is happening around you in a way in which there's no self-significance whatsoever.
Right. Well, yeah. So here's what's interesting, this banter, right? Like you say something, I process, I think about it, I make connections, I pass it back to you, so we're kind of like shifting back and forth. It's kind of like this funny tide. And in a way, it's kind of like what you're doing is you're just kind of adding a new drift or a new force or a new pressure, so that when you're talking to somebody, it's like when you talk to me, for example, then that leaves me thinking these new ideas. And so I'd never thought of Wings of Desire in that way. But now that you've reminded me of it, and hope other people who are listening to this are going to be like, oh, okay. So let me ask you a question.
Sure.
Of the 3 images, 2 of them are photos of a scene or landscape photos. You sent me one, which you call a selfie in glass, with the mirrors and windows, right? So how would you deconstruct or detangle the idea that the selfie you send me is completely not so it's kind of like, actually it just mirrors or echoes what you were saying in terms of, well, I don't necessarily want to impose myself on people, and this very selfie that you send me is kind of like, where's David? It's
right.
like, you know what I mean? So
right. Well, there's I mean, we could unpack it. I could talk about this particular photograph for half an hour. there's a lot in it. So maybe as a way of entry into it. When I was in my early 20s, I had come across this book about lucid dreaming. I don't know if you've heard of this before.
Sure.
Right. So it's this sort of peculiar hybrid state in which is very often it's difficult to achieve and difficult to sustain, but effectively you become conscious in the way that you would be in your waking state, but while you are having a dream. And it has this quality almost like of being in the holodeck in Star Trek or something like that, right? So you are aware of the fact that you're dreaming, but your sensory experience is in many ways very much like, almost exactly like what you would be experiencing while you're awake, and sometimes even more vivid. The main difference, of course, being is that because you're not getting sensory input, which is grounded by the regularities of nature, your imagination is also at play. So
you can fly.
Yeah, you can fly. Some of the consistencies that you would expect in a physical environment aren't going to be there. Like if you look at a clock, you might see the time, you look away, you look back at it, and it's different, right? So your brain isn't good at sustaining those kinds of patterns. In any case, I was completely fascinated by this and spent a lot of time exploring it. But I started to sort of do experiments in that state. So, I would wake up inside the dream, and then I would start almost like a physicist might. I would start testing out the parameters of the space that I was in. Seeing what it's like. What was the gravity like? Where were the light sources? It's a bright day. Could I see the sun? And this one in particular, I had this very vivid one in which I woke up and found myself standing, I might have been in Ireland, something like that. It was this, perfect sunlit day, these rolling green hills. I was standing barefoot in the grass, seeing the dew sparkling. I could feel the wet grass under my feet. And I started to run through all of the facts that I knew about where I actually was. So I knew, it's like, what's my address? Where am I? I'm in my bedroom. I'm sleeping in the bed. And yet, so it's like being aware of all of those facts, and yet here I am standing in this field. And in this particular dream, I wanted to see if I could both perceive the space that I was in the dream, and also feel the bed. And I did. I could feel the pressure, as I kind of did, whatever it was, kind of extended the tendrils of my perceptual awareness, could kind of feel the pressure of the bed on my back, while still looking out over this grassy field.
Amazing that the memory of this, it's memories of dreams, mostly listening to other people's dreams can be a real downer or whatever.
Right.
But in this case, what's fascinating is that also that you have the memory that has remained, a very clear memory of it, which is okay. Keep going.
Yeah. Well, it was there was something about this sort of the epiphanic realization. It made a very, very strong impression of simultaneously being in two places at once.
Mm-hmm. Oh wow!
And then that just changed the way that I thought about reality afterwards. Because it wasn't so clear, when I woke up the next day and went to work, it's like, well, how is this fundamentally different from the dream? Mm-hmm. Right? It permanently affected the way that I thought about consciousness. And so this comes into play in this particular image, insofar as you have what started off as, what I could see as my own reflection in the glass. And then in the same fashion as in that dream state of shifting the focal plane of attention to either, being in one space or being in the other.
Okay.
And I think the image shows this. So you have this peculiar, because we've got the pane of glass that is the railing. You've got the panes of glass that are, from on the sliding door on the windows. So we've got these 4 reflective surfaces. And if, on the right-hand side of the image, we see what is predominantly the man-made construction, right? That's where you see the house.
Yeah.
You can see the couch kind of inside the living room. But at the same time, there's a tree growing in front of the couch. On the right-hand side of on the left-hand side of the image, you see nature. So you can see the ocean, you can see the forest, you can see the mountains, you can see the sky and the sunlight. And yet there's a little bit of structure of, the human-made structure, which is also kind of, peering through the trees.
Right.
And kind of at the center of it all is this figure, which is both there and not there, right? It's sort of, you can sort of get the sense of a head-like structure in the middle. And to me, this is just kind of an exquisite symbol of what, kind of the illusory nature of the self.
Right.
And how it can shift back and forth. It's constantly, sort of shifting its perspectives and really deriving its sense of continuity from those transitions as opposed to it being anything that is solid.
Right. So here's what's interesting as well, is that because it is you who are there at that time making that image, you have a lot of anchors that you read that image in a way that reflects that time and that memory. So you're it reinforces, because you have the memory of the space and you have the memory of the smells and you know what your head looks like in that shape. As somebody who hasn't been there, who doesn't have those anchors, I'm taking it on faith, the idea that you can see your head. It's, in a way, even that is one level outside. You know what I mean? Like it's not even accessible to me. And I can see, for somebody who is interested in like, as you're saying, in terms of, the realness of reality and the, perception of it, why an image like this would resonate and be meaningful. And I think I really would suggest that if, for example, in a previous, and it's quite interesting, a previous guest I had here, Lady Chisholm, she herself has been going into neuroscience as well. And she was also talking about what it is to perceive and to see. It's interesting that these are that I've gravitated to people who happen to be in this part of the world of thinking, it's quite interesting that I could connect your image here with what she sent and what she talked about. How much of this influences your everyday, teaching chemistry? How do you confuse your students?
I think it's just a regular through line there. It almost doesn't matter what I'm teaching, that, the notion of cultivating a kind of self-awareness that doesn't become imprisoned within excessive self-reflection. Mm-hmm. So, there's this notion of mirrors within mirrors. I think that, people can become trapped within their own thought processes. And in fact, thought seems to be predisposed to that, predisposed to, getting trapped within endless self-reflection.
Right.
And so, the question of what it's like to have a nervous system that is in an appropriate balance and orientation, both within itself and with others, with the external reality, so that it acts harmoniously and intelligently. That just operates in the background of, I think whatever it is that is being communicated. So it's not for me. So it's not just, it's like, okay, we'll learn about, maybe we'll talk about how to calculate pH today, but at the same time, we're learning about ourselves and our thought processes and the obstacles we might encounter.
Yeah. One of the things that I think about in terms of because when you're thinking about chemistry, you're also you're thinking about the substance, but you're also thinking about the atomic behavior.
Right.
And when you start looking at the sort of atoms and the science of it, and you're just like, well, wait a second, what is matter even? Let alone, right. So I can totally see then trying to understand, well, how does consciousness exist within these matter systems? I could totally, and it ties in the philosophy and the psychology and everything. Like I can definitely connect with what you're saying.
Well, yeah, because chemistry is this central science. It's like we're talking about matter. Well, what is matter? Why do we define it as such? And I think to get oriented to that and to understand that in some fashion, all of this is it's a construction of human enterprise. Like we're telling a story about what we think is happening in this physical world, but based on how we perceive it and how we measure it.
Yeah.
But we're not separate from that process. Right? Like although sometimes science gives you the sense of it, being something independent, it absolutely is not.
Right. Yeah. That is a perfect segue, oddly enough, that I will use, and please take it, to go to the next image, because basal dendrites. My first degree was in creative writing, so writing poetry, like the least useful thing a person could possibly ever do. So
I don't agree, but
no, I'm saying this facetiously. Okay, but so I read basal dendrites, and to me, those two words are music, like basal dendrites. And do you want to describe the image, or do you want me to describe it?
Sure. I quite enjoy your description. So please,
okay.
Please go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. So I love it. So the top third, I guess, is, it looks like the BC rainforest you see these gray trunks, just everything's flecked and mossed over with a bit of green, and you could see a bit of the leaves. So it's the trunk, like the gray, but you also have these, like the vertical, not too far away, but vertical trunks. And then in between, instead of seeing white, you see green, because it's like this, it's just this forest that seems it's quite open. The bottom 2/3 is just the exposed root system of these trees. And on it are probably the topsoil or the mulch of cedar and other kinds of trees. So it's very warm and brown. It's a stunning image. It's like just absolutely stunning. And this actually ties into another guy I spoke to, Adrian Bejan, who talks about why is it that, for example, the water system, the river system of a delta look like a lung, which look like a tree, which look like the trunks. So then when I see these basal dendrites, what a beautiful thing to say, basal dendrites. It echoes that. It looks like a brain. It looks like a heart. It looks like not like a heart, but like a lung. What does this image signify for you?
Yeah, well, I think you actually happened right on it with the part of the fractal notion of it, as you were describing. That your other guest was on about seeing these similarities of pattern. But you know what? On at first blush, it's just the sort of geometric richness of the image. It's just, again, one of those ones walking along a trail. This was to China Beach, which you may have visited in your time in British Columbia. So, it's just this visually arresting, kind of sight as you turn a corner on the trail. But there's another level for this for me, which is that a great deal of the work that I did when I was in grad school was we had a mouse model of a disease, and inside the layer 5 pyramidal neurons of the neocortex, we actually had this transgenic mouse that expressed a fluorescent protein in these pyramidal cells. And these are the ones, so if people were to imagine the kind of canonical image about what a brain cell, like what a neuron looks like, it would be the layer 5 pyramidal cells. And it's because they really look like trees.
Right.
They look like these trees.
Oh, wow.
So I actually spent probably a year of my life, doing 3D confocal fluorescence microscopy, taking, these three-dimensional, almost like a stack of pancakes, of layers of these digital images of these fluorescent neurons, and then tracing them in 3D,
Oh,
sort
wow.
of just sitting in darkened rooms. And so, and actually literally tracing what are called the basal dendrites. So, these neurons they've got sort of like their main trunk. Okay. So they've got the cell body, they've got the main apical dendrite, and they've got these branches up at the top. And then they've got these things which look more like roots.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And it's what allows them to, intercommunicate with their neighbors, to connect to other parts of the brain, et cetera. And so having spent, literally a year of my life staring at these things, these tiny, tiny little cells, and then seeing this pattern recapitulate, it's exactly like what your other guest was describing. This notion of, there's this fractal patterning that happens where you're seeing across disparate timescales the same sorts of structures repeating.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's probably the first pass level of what draws me into the image.
Uh-huh.
And then the next aspect of it comes from a feeling that I would often get being in forests, and which was, layered upon from the studies that I did in grad school, like being inside a brain.
Okay.
So it's like, to actually extend the fractal notion, what a forest, it's like the quality of a forest is like being inside a neocortex.
Mm-hmm.
Right. There was a film in the 60s. I can't remember. I think it was called Fabulous Journey, or The Wondrous Journey. I can't remember the title of it. But some scientists they get miniaturized and injected into a.
Oh yeah.
So attempting to expand one's, sensitivity or perceptual awareness to, maybe feel what it's like if the brain, if a forest was a brain.
Right.
If in fact these things are, if trees are like neurons, and this thing is a collective system which is engaged in information processing just on timescales, not of milliseconds, but, of years or decades.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just to kind of bathe in that, entertaining that idea,
Mm-hmm.
and get a lot of enjoyment out of it.
Okay. So one of the great things about, for example, philosophy, right? So I have a friend here in Hong Kong who teaches philosophy, and he likes to take his class on walks. And the idea being that on a walk, you can let your mind kind of freely associate and all this stuff. Okay. Pulling it out over to British Columbia. When I say it, I have to say it with falsetto. Okay. So the forest out there is, it's a rainforest. It's a bit cool. But what's great about the image is that when you look at it, you can see that, well, there's no real trail to walk through it. And it does look like this mass of organic and sure, like, okay, so of course, if you look at it as an image, the first surface, it's trees and exposed roots. But as you say, if you look at it from, through another glass or another perception or another step, it could very well be these dendrites, right? And there's something kind of interesting about walking through there, right? Which BC's forests are so big and epic, and you as you walk through it, it's, I think, unlike other forests, certainly in Ontario or Quebec or anything, or Hong Kong, let alone Hong Kong. The thing about BC forests is that you really feel their aliveness in a way that. So like there's this notion of going and hugging trees, which sounds so flaky. It sounds like so like, oh, come on. And it's not that I necessarily hug trees, but when you walk through these forests, you really feel the bigness of it. And I can absolutely connect with you walking through there and then turning your head and then looking at that and just saying like, well, it's just leaping out at you saying, look, here I am. Like this is like, make that connection because it's so clearly evident.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And I actually have a lot of sympathy for, a religion like Shinto, where you've got this, which I suspect, I'm not an expert in this, but probably most traditional cultures have this animistic, notion, which, we could deconstruct scientifically. It's like, sure, this is what human brains do, where they, because we're evolved to attribute selfhood to each other, because we're a social species, sometimes our brain can generalize that to, other, what we might call, inanimate or vegetative objects. So we might ascribe, beingness to a river or to a tree or to a mountain, something like that. And of course, view that as a kind of confusion or delusion, right? It's an overgeneralization of something which is actually functional and useful when we apply it to each other. But I don't know if you're familiar with Marie Kondo. She's became quite popular in the last couple of years about how to organize your home. How to fold your socks in your sock drawer.
Is she the one who, like, you touch something and then if it
that's
doesn't?
Right. Yeah,
okay,
that's right. And you basically, so in a way, it's kind of like modernized Shinto as I see it. It's quite animistic. It's like, if you're going to figure out how to fold your sheets, you kind of have a conversation, with it and with yourself, and ask your socks how they want to be stored,
Yeah.
in your sock drawer.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, from a scientific perspective, absurd. Your socks don't care how they're folded, but I think it has very interesting effect. It has very interesting cognitive effects. If you approach life as though all of the things with which you're interacting are in fact, you can ascribe a kind of beingness to them. There's the heuristic effect of that is that it just changes how you live. Right? You just become much more sensitive and respectful. And when you start to, for example, move through a forest, I think arguably there's the absurdity becomes of taking that stance becomes less and less. Where you can come up to a tree that was there long before you were born and which is going to outlive you. That you can have a sense that this is kind of an autonomous being. It doesn't have a mind like yours, but it has something.
Yeah.
And you can relate to it in a very different way from that perspective. Almost the way cells within a multicellular organism might relate to each other. It's like, you're a neuron and I'm a white blood cell, but we're all in this.
Right.
We're all in this together. Yeah.
Okay, so let me throw a question into the pool and see what ripples we can spot. In the photograph, because you're walking around, and I have this feeling in this sense that when we get all of this information, and then our brains kind of perk up or connect or kind of stop. So you had the whole motivation to stop walking, to lift up the camera, to make the photo from there. Now, what's interesting when you look at the image is that in the whole image, it's all browns and greens and blacks. Yet, and the brown is kind of a warm brown, but it's not too neutral, but it's a brown. But in the whole image, there's this one little dot on this one little tree that's right far away. It's like, it must be a small sign, and but it's bright orange/red. Fluorescent, and it's in the image itself, it's probably less than 0.1% of the image surface, right? So when you look at the picture, it's kind of like if you look at the rule of thirds or whatever, it's in the top third quadrant. There's this one little red thing that your eye gets pulled towards.
Just leaps towards it. Yeah.
So here's a question for you. Do you think that placement was conscious, or was it a happy accident?
When I took the photo?
Yeah.
Oh no, that's very conscious. So
great.
For when I take a photograph like this, I'm sometimes a bit of a nightmare to go on hikes with because it's like, okay, you go ahead, and I'm just gonna take 50 photos, and I'm like lying in a ditch somewhere, or standing on my head, and just to try to get the composition perfect.
You sound like a photographer to me, man. I don't care what you say. You sound like a freaking committed photographer.
Well, I think once you see it, and I think probably one of the one of the more painful things about taking pictures, even on my phone, is that sometimes I just can't get it.
Mm-hmm.
I can see the thing. But I can't position the camera in such a way that I can capture in the photograph what I can see.
Right.
And that hurts. It's like there's this beautiful, extraordinary thing you want to share, and it remains this thing which is just for you and just for them.
I think that sentence, a beautiful, extraordinary thing you want to share. I don't know, man. I mean, like that, for some reason, those words coming out of your head make sense to me. Like, okay, I connect with that.
Yeah.
So for your students, into a classroom which is mostly functional, right, which is a competence-based class, how do these ideas ever get folded in? Because in a way, I'm assuming that part of what you're doing as an instructor is you're kind of raising them to kind of go one step higher and further. And, if we look at it in terms of human advancement, right? So how do you elevate their consciousness to see in the way that you see?
I think of course there's the content you have to deliver as that's, what you're mandated with, but at another level, it's there's something a little bit that goes a little bit like, okay, watch how I do this.
Okay.
Right. And you show by doing, it's a little bit like, you have children. So, you might imagine and maybe you've done something like this where you have to run across a fast moving stream by skipping from one stone to the next. And there's a certain mental state they have to get into, to work up the courage that, they're going to be able to do it, but they have to be in a state of motion, right? They have to commit.
Right.
They have to commit and then embrace what it is to move and flow through the thing. And so I feel like that, in teaching, there's almost something like that. It's like, okay, so here's how I would work through this and here's how I would see it. And then when I'm on the other side of the stream, I turn around and I say, show me, show me how you do it. And then we can then have a very interesting dialogue about where sometimes I learn from them too.
For sure.
Right? There's some new way, in their unique expression of how they see the world and how they approach things, where we now are starting to teach each other. And I think that is probably the most significant thing of all, where they get a feeling of not this hierarchical relationship of, being, the teacher and the taught, but rather, sort of co-participants or co-explorers of how to navigate life.
Yeah.
And, so I think that's probably, how we might try to fold some of that into the day to day.
David, seriously, so good. Look, I love these conversations because they can go in any direction. And I love the sort of the magic that people bring. And when you send me the pictures, they're great. And I love how you think.
Likewise. Well, I think you're doing a kind of a magical thing here too, drawing all of these, weaving some very disparate strands together from all over the world. And I think, it's quite remarkable.
Oh.
So.
Well, we'll see if it's, look, you just keep making images and I will have you on. And I think, I was sort of, I got a whiff of maybe you'd want to start a podcast. I think you should because, I really do think you have a very interesting way of expressing yourself.
Well, there's nothing, conversations like this are probably, one of the things that I enjoy most, out of life. So.
Right. I think maybe you and I should start dating.
Well, it's a new millennium.
Okay, Dave, thank you so much, man.
All right. Thank you,
have a great day.
This was great.
Yeah.
Take care.
Shooting it raw?
Yes. Shooting